Mr. Evan, there is a young girl who insists on meeting you. Send her away. I don't entertain strangers, but she says, she's your daughter. The room fell silent. Evan lifted his gaze from the file he was reading, his cold, arrogant eyes flashing with a momentary confusion. Daughter? Who? He had never had a daughter. In that instant, all the buried memories knocked on his door. A rainy afternoon many years ago, a girl he once loved deeply, a goodbye that had never truly ended. The door to the meeting room opened. A girl walked in, her eyes firmly fixed on the most powerful man in the city. I'm not here to ask for money. Then what do you want? Evan asked coldly. The girl tightened the letter in her hand. I just want you to look at me, as a father would. In that moment, Evan knew his life would never be the same again. He was about to lose his reputation, his wealth, even the empire he had spent years building. But what he feared most wasn't the loss, it was facing his own past. That morning, like any other, Evan left his luxurious mansion and stepped into his glossy black car. The sunlight filtered through the windows, but it couldn't brighten the quiet atmosphere inside. He was accustomed to the silence because, in his world, there was no one to talk to except for work. Everything was calculated, every step carefully planned. The company he founded had now become an empire, an irreplaceable symbol. People looked up to him, but also with some apprehension. Evan never smiled, never appeared friendly. Work was his sole priority, and he believed that coldness was the key to success. He never let emotions cloud his judgment. When he entered the company office, his steps were decisive, without hesitation. The elevator doors opened, and he stepped into the lobby where employees were busy with their tasks. Everyone paused, their eyes following him, but Evan didn't care. The sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, but he only heard the ticking of the clock. The truth was, to him, nothing was more important than running this company, and nothing could change this routine. This was his life, the life he had chosen, one that allowed no surprises, no room for weakness. But no one expected that today, a girl would walk into his life, bringing with her a shocking revelation, and a truth he had never been prepared for. The girl walked into the company unannounced, surprising many. Dressed in a white shirt, blue jeans, and casual sneakers, she didn't resemble the usual visitors who dressed in luxury, with elaborate makeup. On the contrary, her presence was like a fresh breeze. Completely different from the dry, formal atmosphere that Evan's company always maintained. She walked straight to the reception desk, where the receptionist was busy on the phone and barely noticed the young girl. The girl wasn't in a hurry, didn't rush, she simply waited in silence. This scene caught everyone's attention. A few people exchanged glances, wondering, who is she? Why is she here without an appointment? The receptionist, a young girl who seemed new to the job, looked at the unfamiliar girl with confusion, but still maintained politeness. Hello, how can I help you? The girl looked up with her bright, sparkling eyes and gently replied, I need to see Mr. Evan. I'm his daughter. Immediately, the atmosphere in the room changed. Her words were like a lightning strike shattering the stillness. Everyone around turned to look at her, no one dared to breathe too loudly. Who is this girl? How could she say that? The whole office fell into silence, and the receptionist was stunned. The girl stood there, her face determined, not the slightest sign of fear or confusion. She seemed to know exactly what she was saying, and she wasn't afraid of the shock it would cause. Her words didn't just surprise the receptionist, they were like a bomb detonating in the silent room. All eyes in the office were now fixed on her. Some were curious, others skeptical, but all were stunned. His daughter? No way. A few people began whispering to each other, but quickly fell silent, fearful of being overheard. The girl didn't appear to be shaken at all, her eyes still fixed on the receptionist, clutching her handbag tightly, her gaze full of determination. She wasn't here to negotiate or beg for anything, she only wanted one thing, to meet her father. But her declaration that she was Evan's daughter was like a challenge to everyone in the company. The entire building, built on power and calculation, had no room for surprises. And now, everything was about to change. The receptionist dialed Evan's office, but in her heart, she felt unsettled. The girl didn't look like someone ordinary, and she didn't seem like a scam artist. The girl stood still, her dark eyes filled with sadness but also a resilience that couldn't be denied. The receptionist still couldn't believe what she had just heard, but there was nothing left to do except pass the message on to Evan. The whole company waited anxiously for his response. When the message reached Evan's office, he glanced at it briefly. The note was simple: "A girl who claims to be your daughter is waiting to meet you." A brief message, but one that carried a big question. Evan couldn't understand it. Daughter? Impossible. He had never had a daughter, at least not to his knowledge. He had never been in a serious, long-term relationship, and certainly no one had ever told him he was a father. Everything he knew about himself was that he was a man who could control everything. He controlled his work, his emotions, and his private life. No one could disrupt his life. He held the phone in his hand but didn't call back immediately. He felt a bit confused, and in that moment, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years began to rise within him. It was uncertainty. Could this be a scam? Or was this girl really his daughter? Evan didn't want to believe it, but something inside him told him this was the truth, and he couldn't just dismiss it like all the other small matters. The meeting room door opened, and the girl walked in. All eyes in the room turned toward her. Evan stared at her, unable to look away, but he tried to maintain his cold demeanor. The girl stood there, saying nothing, just looking at him as if everything around them had vanished. Her hands trembled slightly, but she remained steady. He couldn't help but notice her eyes filled with determination, sorrow, but also a resolve he couldn't deny. Though her heart might have been filled with fear, her eyes were shining with confidence, as if she had been preparing for this moment for a long time. She didn't rush to say anything. She just stood there, facing Evan as if all she needed was one chance for him to understand who she was. This was the moment of destiny, the moment when both of their lives would change forever. Evan felt something deep within him begin to change, a feeling he had never experienced before, a mix of fear and hope. Evan couldn't believe what he had just heard, though he sensed some truth behind the girl's gaze. He decided not to let emotions take control. Coldly, he stood up and said firmly, "You say you're my daughter? This is a scam." But when he looked into the girl's determined eyes, his heart tightened. The feeling was indescribable. His doubt couldn't deny something strange, a connection he had never felt before. He couldn't understand why he felt this way. He had lived his entire life to keep emotions from messing things up, but now, his heart was starting to crack. The girl opened her small handbag and took out an old letter, tied neatly with a thin red silk string. She gently placed the letter on the table in front of Evan. The signs of time on the letter could not conceal the strong emotions of the years that had passed. Evan looked at the letter with a cold gaze, but deep inside, he felt an indescribable sensation. Part of him wanted to dismiss everything, thinking this was just a joke. But another part of him couldn't shake the strange feeling that this letter was the key to unlocking a part of his memories that he had intentionally buried. The girl picked up the letter, her eyes never blinking, as she read the words as if they were the final words of her late mother. I have always thought of you, even after all these years. You were the only love in my life. We had a moment of happiness, but everything changed when you decided to leave to build your career. I understand, but I've always felt lonely. Your daughter, she has grown up without ever meeting you, but I have always hoped that one day you would come back. She paused, and as she looked into Evan's eyes, the silence filled the room. The letter felt like a call from the past, and Evan could clearly feel the pain in every word. The image of the girl from that time, named Claire, appeared in Evan's mind like a blurred painting. She was gentle, with long flowing hair and eyes as clear as a deep ocean. He remembered every moment spent with her, the afternoons sitting under the shade of trees, talking about the future and shared dreams. Claire had always believed they would have a happy family, that he would never leave her. But Evan, still young and full of ambition, only thought about the future, about his career, and the heights he could reach. He wanted to be someone admired by society, successful not just in work but in life. He promised her that he would return, that he would never leave her alone. But after he left, everything changed. Evan still clearly remembered the last moment he stood in front of her house, Claire's eyes full of tears, but she said nothing, just silently looking at him. The feeling of guilt began to rise in him, but he couldn't stop. He had chosen his own path, a path with no room for love. But now, standing before this girl, all those memories flooded back, and Evan realized that maybe he had made a mistake. He wondered how different their lives would have been if he had chosen to stay. The feeling of regret slowly crept into his heart. When Evan received the news that Claire had left, he never thought she carried his child. The message came from an old friend, informing him that Claire had left the city. And no one knew where she had gone. Everything seemed to collapse around Evan at that moment, but he saw it as just part of life. He no longer kept in touch with Claire, thinking that she had chosen to leave to find a new life, without needing him. In his heart, he believed that she could live well without his help. He couldn't even understand why she left him when they had once shared beautiful love, and why she couldn't wait for him to return. He had thought she just wanted freedom, not wanting to be burdened with commitments. But he never knew that Claire's departure was not just her decision but a step she felt forced to take. Now, as he looked at this girl, Evan realized that he had missed so much. What he had thought was the right choice had become the greatest regret of his life. He could not ignore the fact that he had abandoned a woman who was pregnant, unaware of the child's existence. The pain and guilt began to consume him. The girl sat upright, her eyes staring directly at Evan. She spoke of the years she grew up without a father. Her mother, Claire, had to raise her alone, battling illness, and always telling her, "One day, you will meet your father. I can't tell you much, but I always hoped he would come back." Those words never left her mind. She clearly remembered the late nights when her mother struggled with pain, but still kept a smile, always encouraging her to live optimistically. Her mother never complained, but she knew the loneliness in her mother's eyes was something she could never erase. The girl spoke of the days when her mother was ill, those mornings when she had to wake up early to care for her mother, not yet old enough to understand that a mother could sacrifice everything for her children. Her mother's promise had become a deep part of her memory, and the girl knew she couldn't disappoint her mother. Her mother had passed away when she was still very young. But before she passed, she left a final word of advice: find your father, and you'll understand much more about life. And today, the girl had found Evan, the father she had never known. She believed that this was the moment everything would change, and the stories of the past would no longer be a mystery. As the girl spoke about her childhood, Evan's heart began to bleed. Every word she said was like a knife cutting deep into the regret within him. He had left, but he hadn't just left a woman, he had left his child. The guilt surged like a storm, and he couldn't fight it. Every word she spoke made him realize how wrong he had been. He hadn't just hurt Claire, but he hadn't seen this child standing before him. The result of the choices he had made in the past, fear began to rise within him. He feared that he could never make up for his mistakes, feared that it was too late to do the right thing. He had once thought that career and success could make up for everything, but now, he realized he had lost the most important things in life, family and love. Finally, unable to wait any longer, Evan requested a DNA test to be sure of his relationship with the girl. He wanted clear answers, wanted to know if he was truly her father. But deep down, a part of him had already started to waver. The confusion and fear couldn't be stopped. Although he had requested the test, part of him didn't want to know the truth, because if the truth were confirmed, it would push him into a battle with himself. The day the DNA test results arrived, both Evan and the girl could feel the tension in the air. It was an ordinary morning, but the calmness was quickly shattered when Evan held the result sheet in his hands. He could hardly believe his eyes as he read the statement confirming that this girl was indeed his biological daughter. 99.99%, such a large number, enough to eliminate any doubt he had. Thoughts swirled in Evan's mind. He looked at the girl, and in her eyes, he recognized something very real. A sense of astonishment, pain, and guilt overtook him. Why had he ignored her for all these years? Why hadn't he known of her existence until now? Every passing second felt as if it had been wasted. He had spent too much time on work, on his career, and had forgotten the most important things in life. Everything seemed to be turned upside down. The feeling of guilt rose with every passing minute, and Evan didn't know how to face this girl. He had not only missed a part of his life but also the years of his daughter's life. The years she had to grow up without a father, without the protection of the father that every child needs. As soon as the news about this girl was made public, the media started surrounding Evan like a storm. Reporters and photographers chased him relentlessly, trying to capture rare images of the mysterious girl. Evan's fame as a successful billionaire became the center of public attention, and with it came endless scrutiny and curiosity from society. Articles quickly appeared in the press with shocking headlines like, "Famous billionaire suddenly has a secret daughter," or "The truth behind billionaire Evan's silence, a forgotten relationship." Questions were raised constantly. Could this be a scam? Was Evan going to deny responsibility for his daughter? The media attention only made the situation more tense than ever. Interviews with family experts, billionaires, and how they maintain their image were held continuously. Evan's reputation was now not only threatened by the appearance of his daughter but also by the public's endless curiosity. This created enormous pressure not only on him but also on the company he was running. While Evan was facing the media storm, urgent meetings were happening in the company. The leadership was worried, continuously discussing how this incident would affect the company's stock and reputation. They couldn't help but feel concerned when they saw Evan's name repeatedly appearing in news outlets with stories about his family and scandal. Some board members began to fear that if the situation wasn't resolved quickly, it could cause the company to lose the trust of investors and customers. They began suggesting ways to protect Evans and the company's reputation from significant damage. Some even proposed that Evan should distance himself from this girl to avoid making a bigger spectacle of things. All of them kept reminding him, the company is the #1 priority, we cannot let personal matters disrupt everything. Evan knew that, no matter what, he had to make a choice, family or company. He felt trapped because his decision could impact everything he had built over the years. But that could not make him ignore the existence of this girl, the daughter he had never known, but who was now a part of his life. Anger and disappointment engulfed Evan. He never thought he would face such a situation. He had spent his whole life building his career, achieving everything he had now. But now, those things seemed to no longer matter. He stood between two roads, one leading to a family he hadn't expected, and the other leading to a company he had devoted his youth to. Evan felt cornered, not knowing what to do. He was furious at the public criticism and felt pressured by the company's leadership. Why did he have to choose between family and company? Why did the most important things always come with the need for sacrifice? He couldn't understand why everything had become such a mess. The feeling of helplessness made him want to give up everything. But at the same time, a small part of him began to feel the truth. He couldn't let his daughter live a life once again without the love of a father, without his care. No matter how difficult the decision was, he knew he couldn't turn his back on this little girl. The girl looked at Evan with sincere eyes, without any anger or demands. She only wanted one thing, to be acknowledged as his daughter. She didn't need money, fame, or public attention. What she longed for was the presence of the father she had been missing her entire life. As a child who grew up without a father, she understood that not everyone had the opportunity to have a complete family. But she didn't ask for much. She just wanted to be embraced by the father she had always hoped for. The years without a father had taught her to be independent, to face difficulties, but deep down, she always felt something missing. And now, when she had the chance to find her father, she only wished for a sincere love, a real relationship. Evan sat there, in a room full of light, but his mind was consumed by the darkness of unanswered questions. How many years had he spent building everything he had? His career, his wealth, his fame. But was it all really worth it if he lost his daughter? He wondered if he had sacrificed too much to achieve those things. All he had done, all the decisions he had made thinking they were right, now seemed to weigh him down. He had overlooked the important things, and now, faced with this truth, he didn't know what to do. Evan couldn't stop thinking about the girl in front of him. Every time she spoke, her words sounded like a familiar melody he had heard somewhere in his memory. This girl, though still young, possessed a strength and independence that could only come from growing up without a father by her side. But there was something else. Yes, her eyes. Those eyes, Evan thought he had seen before, perhaps in some vague, distant memory. He began to observe her more closely, not with the eyes of a billionaire, but with the eyes of a father searching for a connection with his daughter. The way she smiled, the way she sighed when talking about life's struggles, all of it reminded him of the mother from his past. He recalled those days, the promises they had made to each other. He started to realize that, despite the years that had passed, this girl still carried a part of him, and a part of the mother who was lost. Those traces could never be erased. Evan wondered if she was like him. Did she have the same dreams, the same worries, the same hopes he once had? She was the product of a past he had forgotten, but now, she stood before him as a reminder of what he had lost. On lonely nights, when no one was around, Evan found himself revisiting the past. He dug through old journals he had written when he was a young man, full of passion and the desire to conquer the world. Those pages contained dreams and aspirations, but also worries and fears. He remembered the feeling of not being confident enough to enter a real relationship, afraid that family responsibilities would hold him back from advancing in his career. The old photos he found stirred a whirlwind of mixed emotions. One photo showed him with the girl's mother, the woman he had loved and thought he would build a family with. Guilt welled up inside Evan as he gazed at the innocent smiles on his face from those days. He wondered, if he hadn't abandoned love and family to chase his career, would things have turned out differently? He had chosen to sacrifice so much, and now, standing before his daughter, he felt old wounds reopening. He could see more clearly than ever before that in the past. He had failed to face the most important things in life. He had been too afraid to love, too afraid to build a family, because he feared he wouldn't be able to fulfill the responsibilities. But now, he understood that it was those fears that had cost him the most valuable things. Evan lay in the large bed, alone in the silent room. The questions swirled in his mind like a storm. He had spent his life achieving great success, wealth, fame, career. But now, looking back, he started to wonder if it was all really worth it. How many things had he sacrificed in his life just to achieve career success? He had given up family, love, and now, his daughter. The question kept repeating in his mind. Unshakable, was it worth it, knowing his daughter had grown up without a father, without the love of a father? Could the sleepless nights spent worrying about work, the tense meetings, the hard decisions, ever fill the emptiness in his heart? Evan realized that career success couldn't compensate for the lack of familial love. It was a painful realization, but also a great shock to him. He began to understand that, no matter what he had achieved, if he didn't have family, if he didn't have genuine love, all of it was meaningless. Evan decided to meet his daughter again, but this time, he didn't want to be a billionaire. He didn't want her to see him as a powerful, wealthy man. He wanted her to see him as a father. A father who could love and care for her, a father who could spend time with her without worrying about work or meetings. He wasn't sure what would happen in this meeting, but he knew that if he continued to live in the shell of a billionaire, he would never understand his daughter. He needed to open his heart, to get to know her, and to show her that despite having everything, he was still a father full of love. This meeting wasn't about business or money. Instead, they sat down, looked at each other, and shared the emotions they had kept hidden for so long. Evan was no longer a powerful man, he was just a father, trying to reconnect with his daughter. That evening, they went to a small restaurant for dinner, a place where there was no public attention, no photographers, and no probing questions. It was just the two of them, sitting across from each other, enjoying their meal in silence. It was a special moment, without the spotlight, just the connection between two people who were family. They talked about the simple things in life. The girl shared her years of growing up without a father, the moments when she felt the absence of love. Evan listened, not as a billionaire, but as a father who truly cared about his daughter. He could feel the loneliness in her words, but at the same time, he saw the strength she had developed throughout her life. They both started to share their feelings, the empty spaces they had lived with for so long. They understood that while they couldn't reclaim the years that had been lost, from this point on, they would never miss another moment. As dinner came to an end, Evan looked into his daughter's eyes and realized something important. She didn't need a billionaire. She just needed a father. A father who could love, care for her, and always be there for her. This realization was like a ray of light piercing his heart, dispelling all doubts and uncertainties. He didn't need to be perfect, he didn't need to make all the right decisions for his whole life. The most important thing was that he would always be a father, and that love was what his daughter needed most. From now on, Evan wouldn't chase after career or fame. He knew that, in order to truly live fully, he needed to love and care for his loved ones. And with his daughter, he would be the father she deserved, the one who would never leave her again. Everything changed in an instant. The news about Evan's secret daughter leaked. And like a tide, but in that moment, he realized that no matter how much money or power he had, he couldn't protect his family if he continued to let the company dominate his thoughts. The waves of turmoil kept crashing, and suddenly, he felt an emptiness. He didn't know what to do, because for the first time in his life, the company was not everything. The daughter he had never known was now the most important thing. But could he keep both, his family and the company, or would he have to choose between them? With the situation tense, Evan's advisory board suggested a cold solution: stay silent, cut off contact with his daughter, and bury the issue to protect the company's assets and reputation. They advised him that in times of crisis, the more he stayed quiet and avoided contact with the media and shareholders, the sooner things would blow over. But inside Evan, those suggestions felt like another storm, powerful and cold. He had once been decisive, making tough choices to protect the company, but now, before him was another choice. Did he have to choose between family and everything he had built? Logic told him that, to protect the company and its assets, he had to sever ties with that girl. Ignore the fact that she was his daughter. But his heart ached. Despite having a successful career, everything one could dream of, he couldn't stop thinking about the daughter he had just met. Their relationship had just begun, but he felt he could lose everything if he didn't act right. Evan stood at a crossroads, and each path was a difficult decision. One side was the career, the wealth, the power he had worked so hard to build over the years. The world knew him as a billionaire, a successful man, a model that many admired. But on the other side was family, love, relationships he had lost over time. And then, there was another choice: redemption. He could change, start over, and reclaim the genuine relationships he had neglected. He could continue immersing himself in work, numbers, meetings, deals to keep his wealth and fame, but was it worth it? He couldn't help but ask himself, if I lose my family, what does everything else mean? Both choices were challenging, and never had Evan felt so exhausted. But he knew that whichever decision he made, he would have to live with it for the rest of his life. After several days of thinking, the girl decided to leave. She didn't want to be a burden to her father, didn't want him to worry about the problems her appearance had caused. Even though she knew she had the right to be loved, the right to be Evan's daughter, she didn't want him to face all the stress. She didn't want to be the reason he had to choose between his family and his company. So, she decided to leave. Before she left a short, simple letter full of emotion: I'm sorry for putting you in a difficult position. Reading those words, Evan felt his heart shatter. A young girl, who had just found her father, was now leaving because of him. A sense of loss overwhelmed him. He hadn't expected everything to unfold so quickly. He didn't have the chance to truly understand the daughter he had just discovered, and now, she had decided to leave. In that moment, Evan felt loneliness more sharply than ever. He realized that no matter how much he had, if he couldn't hold on to family, he could lose everything that truly mattered. Evan held the letter in his hand, reading it over and over again, the lump in his throat growing. His heart ached as though something had broken inside him. He had never felt so weak. Over the years, he had faced countless challenges, from big deals to major decisions at the company, but he had never felt so small. The letter, simple yet sincere. made him realize that no matter how much power or wealth he had, he couldn't replace the precious moments of family. He had once neglected her, let relationships grow cold for his personal ambition. But now, the truth hit him hard. He hadn't been able to keep his daughter, just because he couldn't face the truth that family was the most important thing. In an uncontrollable moment, Evan left everything behind. He stood up from the boardroom table, leaving behind the shareholders, the important discussions. He couldn't sit there for another second. He had to find his daughter, fix things before it was too late. He didn't care about his reputation or wealth anymore, only the girl was important to him now. With a decisive move, Evan ran out into the pouring rain. Despite the heavy downpour, despite the challenges ahead, he couldn't stop. Everything could be lost, but he couldn't lose his daughter. The raindrops were like the tears he couldn't cry, but they were a reminder that sometimes, the most important things in life are the simplest ones. And he wouldn't let everything slip away without trying to make it right. Evan stepped out of the car, feeling the cold breeze of the afternoon. But inside, he felt nothing but emptiness. He no longer cared about the pouring rain or the important decisions left unmade. He had only one goal now, to find his daughter. In those moments, he felt as if he had returned to the darkest time of his life, when he couldn't properly recognize the things that mattered most. But now, he knew he had to make it right, to reclaim the love he had lost. Walking along the street, he found her sitting alone in the park. Her shoulders trembled in the cold wind, arms tightly wrapped around her knees, her gaze distant, focused on the drifting clouds. Though she said nothing, everything she was feeling was reflected in her posture. This girl, his daughter, whom he had missed all these years. Evan stood still for a moment, watching the tears on the face of the girl he loved. A wave of guilt washed over him, burning away all his logic and pride. He could no longer bear to see this scene. Silently, he approached, kneeling beside her and gently placing a hand on her shoulder. She turned to face him, her eyes full of hurt, as if asking him whether there was any chance for them to start over. And in that moment, Evan could say nothing. He could only hold her tightly, letting the tears fall freely, as if this was the first time in his life he could cry, let his feelings out, and ask for forgiveness. In that moment, the world seemed to stop. Evan held his daughter tightly in his arms, in a real, loving embrace that he had missed for so long. He didn't say anything, as there was no need to. Both of them were silent, but the silence held a universe of emotion. No more questions, no more guilty consciences, just the love between father and daughter. Each tear from Evan was a regret, a silent apology that he couldn't put into words. He couldn't believe that he had once forgotten this girl, the one he had unintentionally lost so many years ago. As she shivered in his arms, he felt all the pain and loneliness she had endured over the years. He had been too focused on his career, too consumed by work, and had forgotten that family was the most valuable thing, and in that moment, Evan realized he didn't need to say anything more. Just this embrace was enough to bring them back together. It was the most wonderful moment of his life. After feeling the true bond between father and daughter, Evan decided to reveal the truth. He had spent his entire life building an empire, but he had never felt truly happy until he found this daughter. He realized that nothing was more valuable than family, nothing stronger than the love between a father and his child. Though he knew this decision would face negative reactions from the company, the media, and those around him, Evan was determined to do it. In a press conference, with complete sincerity in his words, he declared, "This is my daughter. I am proud of her." It was an unforgettable moment. He was no longer just a billionaire, nor just the head of a big company. He was a father who was proud of his daughter. And no matter how many storms he had to face, he would never regret this decision. The public was not only surprised but also empathetic. Though some criticized him, the majority sympathized and supported him. They saw a strong man, but also a man full of emotion, a father full of love. The company's stocks did not fall as they had expected, instead, they soared. The public had realized that behind Evan's success and power was a man full of compassion and humanity. Everyone was surprised by Evan's decision. No one expected that, amidst the storms and scandals, he could remain calm and brave enough to do the right thing. The image of a powerful billionaire, but also full of love, became an inspiration for many. Evan's story was not just a lesson about family, but also a reminder that, no matter how much power or success we have, family love is the most important thing. Evan's company, instead of suffering negative effects, received strong public support. Investors, shareholders, and customers all saw that honesty and humanity were the core values that any brand needed. The company's stock soared, and everyone who had feared a crisis now saw their mistake. They understood that, sometimes, sincerity was the most important factor in building a sustainable brand. From that moment on, Evan and his daughter began to rebuild their relationship from the beginning. It couldn't change overnight, but every day was a new step. They learned to understand each other, to share unspoken feelings. Evan learned how to be a father, not a billionaire, but a real father. He learned how to love unconditionally, how to protect and care for the daughter he had missed. His daughter also learned how to open her heart, to face the emotions she had held back for so many years. She learned to trust, to love, and to appreciate the father she had just found. This relationship wasn't an easy step, but they were both willing to face it, little by little. And then, after all the storms, Evan realized something incredibly simple that he had overlooked all these years. True wealth wasn't money, but holding the hand of the one you love, being with the people who matter most in life. He had once thought all he needed was wealth and power, but now he knew the most valuable thing was family, love. No longer afraid of the past, no longer feeling regret, Evan lived a meaningful life. He wasn't just a billionaire, but a happy father, a man who could be proud of what he had done. And more than anything, he understood that life isn't always about achieving goals, but about the people we love and the precious moments we share together.